Mike Jackson, WSIC News.
Oh, shoot. Love
Good
you guys.
morning, Lake Norman. We're coming to you from the WSIC studio, nestled on the banks of beautiful North Carolina. Streaming live worldwide from Dublin, Ireland to Belvedere, South Carolina. I'm your host, Bill Russell, president of Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce, the largest chamber of commerce in the Charlotte region. I'm joined by Jeff Tarte, a three-term mayor for the town of Cornelius. He also served 3 terms as senator in North Carolina, along with Andy Yates, who's the co-founder of Persuasion Perfected, the parent company behind RepublicanAds.com, and the public affairs partner. Our radio host normally, Justin Cabezas, is I think he's at the beach this weekend enjoying himself, but he's at the Hilton Head. Thank you, Bill. We need to talk about the huge event that happened this past Friday. And that is the release of Barbie the movie, Andy. The Barbie the movie. I mean, we're talking about a blockbuster here, $356.3 million in the opening weekend, making it the largest toy movie of all time. Did you take Nancy to see Barbie the movie this past weekend?
Candidly, no.
No? Jeff, you did?
But I tell you, Barbie is a big deal. You look at it historically. The interesting fact, Barbie and my wife were born on the exact same day, same year. They were born at the same time.
Have they ever been seen in the same place at the same time?
But I'm going to worry if they were dating the same guy.
Andy, did you and Charlotte sneak off to Barbie?
We did not go see Barbie.
No? Is it in your plans this weekend?
It is not in my plans.
Hey, Bill, did you go see Barbie this weekend? Yeah, I know you were on vacation. Did you see Barbie?
I did see Barbie.
All right.
I did see it.
There you go, Barbie the movie. Okay, yeah, that's. Although I think you're probably more of a Ken type of guy, right, Jeff?
Well,
Ken?
I think the thing that's interesting with Barbie actually is the fact that the influence they had on young women. There's women because of the way Barbie would present, as a doctor, as a lawyer. A lot of women went into professions because of Barbie.
It's a culture power. I mean, it's. I mean, I think you're seeing at the movie the influence it had, and lets people go back to a different time in their life and kind of reflect on that. It's kind of cool to see zero desire to see it. Probably wouldn't go if you paid me, Bill, but I think it's cool to see the impact that the products had on folks and the nostalgia that people have for the movie, and to see people dressing up to go to that, to see people dressing up to go to Oppenheimer. It's kind of cool, and the movies are back.
And Oppenheimer, that's what, 3.5 hours?
It's at least 3 hours.
Both of them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the other event. A little bit smaller event than Barbie, but filing deadline closed this Friday, 12 o'clock. And we have a boatload of candidates. Let's do the easy one first. Davidson. You had 5 slots for the town board, and we had 5 candidates file, and 1 slot for mayor and 1 candidate filed. Jeff, what does that say? Does that say that the citizens of Davidson are rather happy with what's going on in Davidson?
Well, Davidson's had a history up until maybe 3 elections or so ago. They picked their board before the election.
Yeah.
And literally the current folks, kind of town fathers and mothers, got together and said, okay, here's who needs to represent us. It's gotten more competitive, mainly as the town's gotten bigger, for one thing. But I think you see predominantly incumbents running, and so that's a town that's working really well. Their board's functional, they communicate well with the community. Rusty is obviously perceived well as well because he's got nobody running against him. So that's a good thing.
This is Rusty's, I think, 3rd term?
I believe
Third
so.
term, yeah. He was elected in 2017.
Now, you actually, Rusty ran the first time against a very popular incumbent, John Woods, and you actually were part of that campaign. And
Yeah, and I think part of what you've seen in Davidson, I mean, you had a board that the voters decided in 2017 and a mayor that was out of touch, that several incumbents didn't run. Mayor Wood lost by an incredibly large margin. Rusty got almost 60% of the vote in the 3-0 race. And I think what you saw happen was the voters went in another direction. The board has remembered where those voters want to be. It's a board that shares the vision, a mayor that shares the vision that the town wants, and there hasn't been a strong desire to change. And I think, what happened in 17 is still fresh enough in folks' minds that they realize they better respond to what the people want, especially in local government.
Well, with Davidson and changing of an incumbent mayor, somebody who'd served 10 years on the board prior to being mayors, you had a classic run-on issue, and it became the focal point, and that was the toll roads.
I mean, I think Wood was in the entire Lake Norman region, from Huntersville to Statesville. I've lived up here since 2010, and I can't think of another incumbent mayor that's lost in any of the towns in that period of time.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
And in Davidson, we have 4 incumbents, and I think we have a newcomer. Who's the newcomer?
Stephen Justice.
Do you know him?
I do not, and there's actually no information available on him yet.
Rusty has done an outstanding job as mayor and has been very involved, particularly in the transportation area.
I think not only the mayor, Rusty's homegrown. I mean, he's all his family. There's like 5 of them that have been mayors. One uncle that was mayor of Charlotte. His uncle was his father or his uncle that was mayor.
His father was mayor of Davidson.
And his uncle Big Joe was mayor for 30 years in Mooresville.
Yeah.
I mean, the Knox family.
Cousin Gary Cornelius.
Mm-hmm.
Gary was my predecessor, and they've been here since literally the 1700s. They're one of the original families here in the Lake Norman area.
I was teasing Rusty a couple of weeks ago. Does he not have anybody in Troutman or Statesville that they could run? I mean, just go ahead and do the whole Lake Norman region. Well, Jeff, let's talk about your town that you were mayor in Cornelius. We've got a pretty wide field in Cornelius.
We do, and we've got, I think, 10 people running for 5 slots, so it's going to be busy. And I think what creates, and Andy, I'd be interested, when you have somebody who decides, an incumbent, not to run and you create an open seat, that tends to bring out folks that view they actually have a legitimate shot at winning a seat. It's hard to do it against incumbents.
That's absolutely right. I think it brings more candidates, but also brings better quality candidates. I think you've seen that in Cornelius. I mean, you've got 2 former commissioners trying to come back. You've got Bob Menzel, who's a business owner, sold his business, very active in the community. You've got somebody like Robbie Carney, who's been in the economic development world, a known quantity in the area, folks with impressive resumes trying to get either back on that board or on that board. And I do think when you have open seats, it's not only more candidates, but it's a higher quality candidate that runs, because nobody wants to beat their head against a brick wall.
Yeah, you talk about the quality of candidates, 2 newcomers to the race. Scott Higgins. Scott Higgins was provost at Western University. This is a guy with a tremendous background, and he's been engaged in the town activities, serving on a number of boards, rec board for a long time.
Yeah.
Charmaine Nephew. This is a woman who's retired from her corporate world, but she was the senior VP for an international Fortune 1000 company. That skill set would be tremendously advantageous to the community. Now, the issue, she's been involved as well, because she's been helping on a lot of the fire and police merit pay and issues around it as well. So there's some really strong people deciding to serve.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good thing for the community, that you're seeing some of the best and brightest come out and want to serve, because it's a challenge to do. You know from personal experience what it's like to serve, particularly at the local level.
As I said, town boards are probably the most important races you'll ever vote for, because in Cornelius is an example, 5 members. 3 people can tax you blindly and take your property through eminent domain. So you better pay attention to who you're electing.
Exactly. That's where the fireworks are.
You know, when we get back from the break, we're going to talk about the mayor's race, because we have 2 candidates running for mayor. Mayor Washam is running for is it the 3rd term? 3rd term?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And
Fourth
term?
Fourth term. Yeah, he and Rusty both went in 17.
Right.
Dennis Bilodeau, who has served on the board, he is also running. So we're going to talk about them. We're going to take a brief break for news. Stay with us on Good Morning Lake Norman. For those of you who are watching us on Facebook or any of our other social platforms, thank you for staying with us while we continue our little conversation. Jeff, this coming August 1st at the Chamber of Commerce, we've got Joe and Terry Carbon that are celebrating 20 years in business with good old fashioned auto care. Go far. Joe has been extremely active in the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce. We've got the Outstanding Ambassador of the Year named after Joe. Um, he's been very involved in the chamber and our community.
Well, yeah, very engaged in the community and helping other businesses. Here's somebody that will mentor other business owners, other entrepreneurs that are starting businesses. They're good people.
So that's 5:30 to 7:30 up at the Chamber of Commerce. So 5 o'clock to 7:30 at the Chamber of Commerce in the Randy Marion Boardroom. Stop on by and see Joe and Terry Carbon. Same night that's going on, we've got National Night Out. It's going to be taking place at Smithfield Park here in Cornelius, 5:30 to 7:30. That's an opportunity for the public to engage with our local police and fire. And we did National Night Out when you were mayor, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah, that's a national evening across. Ed Johnson, okay. Well, we'll take him right when we come back from the break. But I think Cornelius is the actually only one that's doing it this coming week. All the others are in Davidson and Huntersville, Statesville, all doing it in October when it's a little bit cooler.
Mm-hmm. It's a great event to have because it's an opportunity, especially with all the stuff that's going on around the police and in the country, the activity the struggle between the community. That National Night Out gives an opportunity for the community to come out, bring the kids, have a good time, and recognize that the police and the firefighters are part, as first responders, part of our community to engage. One of the things we always talked about was you want kids to recognize that when they see a police officer, that's a safe harbor. That's somebody you run to, not away from, when you need help.
Andy, I was sharing that I really believe one of the reasons that we didn't see some of the riots or unrest of a couple summers ago was because of our engagement with the police and our folks through National Night Out, Ada Jenkins, Unity and Community.
I think that's critical. I mean, our police departments here locally do a great job getting out in the community, being at charity events, and being at things that go on in the different neighborhoods. You see them out at Big Day at the Lake, for example, which was this past weekend. And that makes a difference. You realize that they're people like you are. It's hard, when you have personal relationships with people, it's hard to demonize them.
All right, we're going to get ready to go back live on the radio. Just a second.
Good morning, LKN continues now on WSIC. News, talk, now.
Welcome back to Good Morning Lake Norman. And I think we have a caller on the line. Did Bill, did you say Ed Johnson? Ed's an attorney out of Atlanta. Hey, Ed, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you're watching.
Well, I wanted to get up early and watch it. I'm as one of your older friends, I'm extremely proud of all the work you're doing with the chamber there and all the progress the community's making. And this sounds like just a good outreach to discuss those issues.
Well, appreciate it, Ed.
But I did want to, we've been friends a long time, and I did want to bring up one thing. And I'm not sure you're going to be pleased about it, but Bill, you were talking about Barbie.
Yes, we were.
And I want to be clear that you used to play with G.I. Joe dolls. I don't know if you still do or not.
Well, that's
my guess is you probably do, but I don't know that.
Ed, that's true.
As a matter of fact, me and your father used to look at you while you would play at these dolls. We would just shake our heads, and Bill Senior loved you, but he would just look at you playing with that doll. I think he would think, "What's wrong with that boy?"
Ed, isn't there an attorney-client privilege in some of the stuff I did as a kid?
Yeah, but you never paid me.
Good point. Ed, are you going to be taking Hannah, your daughter, to see Barbie?
Bill, it's funny you said that. I just so your radio audience knows, I'm an old father. I have a 14-year-old, and she looked at me and pronounced that she was going to the Barbie movie, and I pronounced she will enjoy it on her own. So now I will not be taking a film.
Ed, you have a
But I
great.
did want to
Go ahead.
I did want to mention one more thing that you were talking about on the break, and then I'll let you guys get back to it. Andy, I think that's great what you're talking about with the community and the police department. We in Atlanta are working on those issues, and when we all grew up, I think the police were seen as a safe haven, and I hope one day we can get back to that. And I think y'all talking about that's a wonderful topic. Any way we can reach our youth and try and establish that's just a good thing.
I think it's one of the most important things we can do to improve public safety overall, and just to make our communities better places to live in, is to rebuild those relationships with youth in the police department, with youth in the fire department. I think it's critical, and not enough attention's paid to that.
Ed, thank you for joining us this morning.
I appreciate you talking. Well, I've got to go, Bill, because I've got to go deal with paying clients, okay?
Point made, Ed.
Yeah, bye.
Ed was bringing up National Night Out. We were talking about it during the break. National Night Out. Cornelius is going to be celebrating that. It's this coming week on August the 1st, Tuesday, 5:30 to 7:30, Smithville Park. They selected to do it with all the other communities throughout America on that Tuesday. Most of our other communities in Huntersville, Davidson, Statesville, Morrisville, doing it later on in the year. Before we went to break, Senator Tarte, we were talking about the race in Cornelius, and coming down to incumbent Mayor Woody Washam and a challenger but commissioner, Dennis Bilodeau.
Yeah, they're obviously both long-term residents, and Woody's really long-term. He was born and raised here. Plays the organ at the local Methodist church, and Dennis has been a businessman. Actually, we've lived here 32 years, and I've actually known Dennis longer than I've known Woody. And as I've told people, this is a classic example where we've elevated the elected officials and candidates who are deciding to run, like you mentioned earlier, Andy. And now you've got two superb candidates that are running. And I've told people it's really, we won't have a loser in that race. We'll only have a winner, and the winner are going to be the residents of Cornelius, regardless of who is elected.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Jeff. It's going to be interesting. I mean, Huntersville's had some very competitive mayor's races over the years. Statesville's had some. You had 2017 in Davidson. Cornelius has had a quiet mayor's race for years now. So it's going to be interesting to see how that race goes, what the dialogue is. To listen to both candidates make their cases. What they've accomplished. They've worked together on with Dennis on the board, Woody as mayor. What they've accomplished individually, what they've accomplished together, what their vision is for the town. And I have a hard time seeing how you're going to draw sharp differences between the two. I mean, seem to have been similar in some of the things they've said in the past. It may come down to ability, accomplishments, personal relationships, how well they're known in the community, and the kind of campaigns they are able to run.
It's interesting with Cornelius. Obviously, it's changed since I first moved here when we had 2,600 residents, and Huntersville had 2,600 residents. Now, Huntersville's closing in on 70,000. Cornelius is over 35,000. I'd like to say they're small towns, but they're pretty good sized towns now. And Cornelius, it's interesting because you're talking, 3,000 or 4,000 votes is all it takes. Mm-hmm. You can almost literally touch every voter that you need. And in a small town and growing up a long time, a lot of people, both of them do. So it's how many of your friends are sticking to you and voting for you. First, you want to make sure your spouse still supports you, right? Not voting for the other guy. And then it's, how do you differentiate yourself, mm-hmm. right? Like you said, they're going to be very similar. So I think transportation in the region is going to be maybe the top issue. And I think it's going to be a little bit of who has been able to accomplish getting projects done, who's got relationships that are able to move the ball forward, who brings solutions to the table that can expedite and bring some of the road projects to fruition sooner than later. But that'll be one of the big issues, I think.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a dominant issue throughout the Lake Norman region. I mean, everybody's fed up with traffic, and I think a lot of the anti-growth stuff you hear about is really a symptom of the traffic problem. It's not that people are not in my backyard, don't want any growth at all. It's they're concerned about traffic, infrastructure, schools, public safety, and that's manifested itself into maybe we should stop some of this growth until we figure these other issues out. And I think that's going to dominate the elections across the region.
Well, public safety is obviously job one for any municipal candidate and town board. The other thing that's interesting is they all talk about education. Ironically, they have no ability to control it at all because that's a county and state level initiative or priority. But they still can influence it. So,
and they can turn off the spigot or turn on the spigot of new people moving in, which does impact schools and crowding and funding at the schools. And not to get off on a tangent, you got the battle here of does the money get spent in Charlotte or does it come back north? And that does factor into it. And the towns make some noise on those issues, but they don't have the ability to vote on anything related to education, really.
Yeah, and the growth issue is a campaign issue. I mean, everybody gets into the talking points, right? Smart growth, controlled growth. Density becomes a subcomponent of that issue. But it's really kind of interesting because we live in paradise. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And you get a little bit of we've built the castle, let's build the moat, and let's draw the bridge up. But it doesn't really work that way. And that's not really healthy for our local area businesses to do that. And so we've got this, it's the connotative difference between traffic. We had one of my mayor pro tems who became mayor after me, Lynette Rinker, had a great quote. She says, we actually love traffic. Traffic's great for our businesses. We hate congestion.
That's a great point.
So how do we solve congestion and yet still allow traffic, to visit our businesses?
Well, we've got one of the things that makes our community paradise is the big, beautiful lake we have. That also throws a whole lot of complications into that traffic question because there's only so much you can do when you've got a huge lake running through the middle of the region.
Well, and the first causeway between Davidson and Cornelius, I remember when we had boaters that actually tried to put the overpass over the causeway where we had a boat one time jump the causeway. I think alcohol might have been involved in that construction activity, but
Jeff, I was reading a story yesterday in Business Day Cornelius today on a particular project, and I saw one of the comments under it that people can comment on stories on Business Day Cornelius today. And they said, why is the Chamber of Commerce supporting these types of projects when some of the citizens are opposed? Well, we're the Chamber of Commerce, not the Chamber of Citizens. And the bottom line is our chamber is composed of businesses, and our number one focus is jobs. We're trying to bring jobs where the people live, and so that they don't have to get on I-77 and drive down to Charlotte. I mean, when I first got here in 1995, most of the primary jobs were in Charlotte. We had some retail jobs and some service jobs, but we didn't have corporations like MSC and those types of Southwire where people could go to work and make some really good money where they live.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight the chamber's not committed to just any job, any business that shows up. There needs to be, good paying jobs. There need to be long-term jobs. They need to be people who will be good corporate citizens in the community. So it's important that we kind of vet the types of businesses. But again, it's all about, creating jobs.
We were talking about a contested election. I think the last time Cornelius had a contested election was one of your races.
Maybe. I mean, my very first one was contested, and then I think my third one also. Well, I had opponents in every race.
Really?
I did. They were more competitive than some were than others.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we get back, we're going to talk about Huntersville. Boy, I tell you what, that is a rodeo down there. What is it, 17 candidates?
17 for
17,
6
and then 3 people running for mayor. Jeff, we have a candidate forum that we put on every year, that we put on in Cornelius, Davidson, Huntersville locally, and then also the state races. You've emceed that, but we're probably going to be, at least in Huntersville, dividing it into 2. We're going to go to a break in just a little while. When we come back, we are going to handicap and talk about the Huntersville race and talk about those individuals running down there. Please come back and join us on Good Morning Lake Norman on WSIC.
I know we're still kind of streaming, but we met.
keep it right here.
Okay, we're up. For those of you who are streaming with us, we're going to be talking about some of the things going on in our towns. Jeff, you were fixing to say?
I was saying with the Huntersville race, we may need to rent a Bank of America Stadium.
You might need some extra security too. Might be a good time for people to come out and meet their local police officers.
That's absolutely right. While we're on a little bit of a break from the radio and they're paying for the station, talk about a couple more Chamber of Commerce activities. On Tuesday, August the 8th, from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, we have our WINS networking meeting. What that is basically a female networking event. It's going to be held at Brick Row, 19725 Oak Street here in Cornelius. You network with business women from Huntersville to Morrisville and beyond. This month's speaker is Lisa Bass. She's with Legal Shield. And it doesn't mean you can't come out to the WINS meeting. It just means that primarily you're going to be surrounded by women and you're going to hear subject matter targeted to women.
Bring your Barbie doll.
There you go.
bring the Barbie. Bring the Barbie. But I tell you, that WINS group, the first time we ever had it, had close to 50. Then, of course, COVID entered in. We had to step back a little bit. But typically about 50 to 80 females attend our WINS meeting. So very well attended.
I'm still convinced women should be running the world. I think about the corporate world coming out of being an former partner of Ernst & Young. Women had a much harder job to get ahead, right? Mm-hmm. They worked twice as hard, twice as smart, just to get there. And we've broken through the glass ceiling fairly well, but there's so many. I look at and we'll get to some of the candidates. There's so many outstanding women running now. And it'll be impressive to see how they do.
It will be. I think that's one of the reasons we have better fields in all these places, because people who didn't feel they could run 10, 15 years ago now doesn't even cross their mind when they decide to run, which is it's a great place to be.
And from a demographic, there's more of them, more women than men now that are registered voters.
Yeah. I was reminded about your mayor pro tem when you served.
Yes,
was female.
Yes, Susan Medlin. We spoke almost every day. I mean, that was a great working relationship. And again, another executive professional running her own marketing organization. So it's nice to see the communities elevating the level of professionalism that's willing to serve on our boards. It's very important.
It really is.
Talking about other Chamber of Commerce events, on Wednesday, August the 9th, 4 o'clock to 5:30, is going to be a membership orientation for new and existing members held at the Lake Norman Chamber. If you're a brand new member of the Chamber of Commerce over the last 90 days, it gives you an opportunity to find out how to maximize your investment and get involved in the Chamber of Commerce. If you've been a member for 25, 30 years, we were actually formed in 1987. It's a chance to familiarize yourself with the Chamber of Commerce. And if you're not a member of the Chamber of Commerce, you get a chance to come out, find out about what we do to impact business and how we can help grow your business. Jeff, you've participated in some of those new member orientations.
I'm biased because I grew up around the chamber with my dad's business. He had a small retail boat shop and a small retail TV shop, and the chamber was critical to us being able to network and meet people and bring people into the business.
And you've been a member of the chamber for how many years now?
Oh gosh, it's probably been seven or 8 years now. Great opportunity, trying to get more involved, and have made some great friends, great relationships through the chamber, and it's a good way to learn from other business community. People are facing the same challenges in different industries, and it's interesting to meet folks, hear how they're dealing with these things, and just a way to see all the great things that are going on here in Lake Norman.
When we come back from the break, we have the station owner, Justin, on the line. I hope we haven't done something wrong.
You're fired, Bill.
may be my last show.
We're counting down to close out this hour.
Thank you for streaming with us. We'll be back on live in just a minute.
Colleagues. In doing so, when we're sitting with folks, then we're looking at their financial plan and seeing if it aligns with their goals and their desires for what yet lies ahead, be it college, be it retirement, or be it estate planning. If that sounds of interest to you, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us at northmainfinancial.com.
I know that guy.
Call now to speak with Justin Kazepis at 844-STUDIO-4. It's Good Morning LKN on the new 105.9, 100.7 WSIC.
Well, welcome back to Good Morning LKN. We have the station owner, Jessica Pessis, on the line. Justin, we're not in trouble already, are we?
You know, I'm realizing, Bill, that after I dialed the phone number, now given the bet you and Joe Vagnone have, I'm going to have to only be fair and call his show tomorrow. So I'm almost regretting calling. But anyway, it's great to you guys are doing fantastic. I just, with the local candidate conversation, I figured I'd just throw out the question. Is there any candidate who's actually willing to be real and have an honest conversation about the issues? Or are we going to deal with a bunch of, let's call them cowards, who are just going to hide behind social media and the people that are coming after them? I'm looking for somebody who's really going to stand out. Who do you got? Who can I put a bet on for that?
You want to take that, Andy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've heard from some folks. I've talked to, one candidate in particular here. He's a friend of mine, Bob Menzel in Cornelius, who one of the reasons he's running is because he's tired of people just offering complaints and not offering solutions. He wants to have, that's one thing he said, he wants to have a real conversation about solutions. We can all identify that traffic's bad. We can all identify that we're worried about crime, this, that, and the other. You can say no growth, you can say less growth, smart growth, but having a conversation about real solutions is important. Fortunately, this soundbite world we're in, and sadly, the limited amount of time voters spend thinking about municipal elections makes it hard to do that. I mean, you're trying to get them to remember one or two things about you and that they like you, and that doesn't lend itself, unfortunately, to some of these bigger conversations. But I do think you've got some candidates in the area that want to have these conversations about vision. I mean, I think you're going to see that in Huntersville in the mayor's race. I mean, I think you're going to see three very contrasting viewpoints there. I mean, I think you've had that conversation almost happen a little bit in Mooresville before the election happened on the growth issue, which ultimately led to the mayor decided not to run again. And so I think you're seeing some of that, but the social media soundbite world we live in just doesn't, unfortunately, lend itself to these big picture conversations. I mean, that's a frustration here from Kansas all the time. I mean, Jeff, you can speak to this from having run before. Kansas want to talk about their ideas, what they'd like to do, that sort of thing, but that's not necessarily what gets you votes. It's not necessarily what makes sense because you've got a very limited amount of time to get through to people, unfortunately.
Well, and that's why even the candidate forums, I'm not sure they're a very good use of everybody's time. And so I'll say that and right up front, because you get a 60-second soundbite. You don't really get to explain. Tell me your position on education and how you're going to solve education. You got 60 seconds. Solve it. It just doesn't happen. But there are people, and this is where one of the questions everybody asks, how do I get to know the candidates? How do I get educated on them? That is a difficult topic, unless you're willing to do your homework and dig. And Huntersville, 17 candidates, that takes some time.
Yeah.
Cornelius, we were talking about them, and Justin, you were asking. I mean, Mike Miltic is an example. If you want to talk transportation, get all the candidates in the room and let them talk in detail. Mike is going to run circles around a lot of them, and not as against the other candidates. Just he's been responsible. He's been chair of CRTPO, which is the governing body for roads in the region, and he's just become a subject matter expert. You look at Scott Higgins. He's been on the planning board, parks board, and you want somebody who will speak his mind and call out the problems and the issues and say, these are the areas we need to address. You can deal with Charmaine nephew. Here's a person who, again, is a Fortune 1000 executive. She understands how to communicate and deal with tough issues.
Justin, are you still online with us?
The other part, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere, baby. No, I'm just kidding.
Pull up a chair.
It's my wife's birthday, so I'm going to have to jump here. It's my wife's birthday. I'm going to have to jump here in a minute. The other piece, too, is we know transportation is ultimately affected at a major state level based on the way legislation is written currently. So when you hear these local candidates, these local politicians talk about, we have traffic issues, then what are they doing to work with the state on changing the way the rules and the process works? Because without changing something, we're always going to have these same issues. I will make this call and I'll make this bet, and anybody can go against me on this. We will never catch up on infrastructure. We will never catch up on infrastructure. I don't think we'll ever catch up on schools. But what we've got to do is have an honest conversation both at the local level and the state level. So I'll do a shameless plug. Monday, I've got Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson coming on at 7:30 on the show, and I'm going to ask him some serious questions about transportation. He's willing to have the conversation, so I look forward to having it. And I would also offer anybody running for office is always welcome to come on Good Morning LKN, and we'll talk about the issues and be honest.
Justin, before you get off the line, I got to know that the question of the morning is, have you taken your daughter to see Barbie?
No, but Uncle Bill, Bill the Buffer, offered to take again because he enjoyed the movie so much. He said he'd go.
Calm down.
Okay, Justin, back for us on the chamber. We're going to give a shameless plug for our Focus Friday podcast that we do. Then next month,
There you go.
we meet on the third Friday via Zoom, and then we put it up on social media. And next month we have the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tim Moore, and he can impact transportation issues and funding.
But I think Justin,
Absolutely. And Representative Jason Sain, who does a show every Wednesday, always is talking about that wonderful relationship and where the Republicans are at the state level. And they're really working together. Now, medical marijuana is a big topic right now. I don't want to bore everybody with that because I know that doesn't really get anybody excited. But a lot going on there at the state. Hate to see Speaker Moore go, but he's got to do what he's got to do. So I appreciate y'all. I'm going to jump here before I get in even more trouble and cause any more trouble for y'all. I love you.
Thank you, Justin.
Well, actually, and Representative Sain is an important person for us regionally because he's the senior appropriations chair. There is not a more influential position on impacting the state budget. So Jason's very important to us in keeping him in office.
absolutely. I mean, that means a ton for this region to have the senior appropriations chair. We're very fortunate to have that. Where the money goes is what gets fixed, right, Jeff?
Andy, before we went to break, we were just getting into Huntersville. Share with us the three individuals running for mayor. You touched on them just now.
Sure. You've got town commissioners Dan Boone and Derek Partee. Dan's been on the town board, I believe, since 2017. Derek's finishing up his first term. But both Republican members, and then you've got Christy Clark, who is a one-term state house member, has run several times for state house for the seat currently held by Representative Bradford. Was the big surprise in Huntersville. She was, until the last day of filing last Friday, she was running for the state house seat that Representative Bradford's giving up to run for treasurer. And then Friday morning, she surprised everybody and switched into the mayor's race and created a new dynamic there. So you've got three candidates, open seat. Three candidates that have all been on the ballot before, have all been elected before. Know what it takes to run a campaign. So it's gonna be very interesting. I think it's probably be the most competitive race in the region in my mind. I think you'll see the town commission races, mayor's race in Cornelius will be competitive. The other races in the region seem to be a little more quieter. Mooresville's an open seat mayor. You'll see some competition there. But I think you'll see the fireworks in Huntersville between the three mayor's candidates, 17 commissioner candidates, a big mix of parties. I think it's where the action's going to be for the most part this cycle. Cornelius kind of stole the thunder last cycle when they threw out 4 of the 5 incumbents, but I think Huntersville's where you want to watch this year.
It's a nonpartisan race, but that being said, you have 2 Republicans and a Democrat running in that. How much does party play into a nonpartisan race?
I don't think it does as much as some people think, because I don't think a lot of people know. A lot of people are not doing that research that Jeff talked about. They don't necessarily know who the Democrat or Republican candidate is. Christy, probably a little bit different. She's been on the ballot multiple times as a Democrat. More people are aware of that. But I think it comes down to more where the candidates are on the issues. And, Republican philosophy or conservative philosophy, Democrat philosophies influence what people think of the town. But issues at the town level on transportation, on public safety, infrastructure, what growth projects, development projects, support, that sort of thing, don't fit as neatly into the party box as the issues that you deal with at the state Senate, for example. So I don't know that people look at it through as much of a partisan lens, and it depends on how the parties choose to get involved. And Huntersville's a plurality, unaffiliated city anyway. 41% of the registration in Huntersville is unaffiliated. So it's who can message to those folks who have if not rejected both parties, at least don't embrace one party over the other.
When we get back from break, I want to talk about what is the voter makeup of Huntersville, because I'd like to really look into that. Stay with us on Good Morning LKN. We'll be right back. Jeff, we were talking during the last break, and those of you who are watching us on any of our social platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, my gosh, we're just streaming worldwide across Dublin, Ireland, Belvedere, South Carolina, and all parts in between. We were talking about some of the events of the Chamber of Commerce. We've got a quarterly nonprofit roundtable coming up on Thursday, August the 10th, 9 o'clock to 10:30. Jeff, we started that, almost 10 years ago. We had 3 major nonprofits have their significant gala fundraising events on one weekend. And, you attend a lot of stuff. You can't attend 3 gala events in one weekend. It's too difficult to do.
That's why it's hard to get your tux rented in time. But I tell you, you talk about the not-for-profits, and particularly a number of organizations that are around Angels and Sparrows and many, many others. There is probably no more important segment of our economy and the impact on people's lives in those organizations. So they're very important for us to embrace, participate with, and fund.
I really enjoy going to those as the president of the Chamber of Commerce, because we go around the room, Andy, and we typically have 30, 35, 40 nonprofits there, and they share, first off, what they do. We go around the room, and they'll, an Angels and Sparrows or Ada Jenkins, Beds for Kids, we'll share what they do, and then we go back around the room with what kind of activity you have coming up in the next quarter. And hearing the impact that they have, the Hope House Foundation of what they're doing and impacting lives, just makes you feel good.
It really does, and especially that these groups are focused right back here in our backyard, our local area. I think sometimes most of us here are very blessed in the Lake Norman area. I think sometimes we lose track of the needs and the people that are hurting right here on our own communities, and to have such a good network of not-for-profits that are here to look after the folks who have health issues or economic issues, struggling, domestic violence, things of that nature, right here in our own backyard is great. And I enjoy having the opportunity to give back right here. It's great to help people everywhere, but I think it's particularly important that we look after our neighbors, and that we have great not-for-profits doing it. And when you don't have that, it falls back on the government. So it's very important that we support these groups and what they do.
Well, as a selfless plug, I'm set on the board for the Lake Norman Community Health Clinic, another organization that's taking care of Medicaid patients. People who really have no insurance, don't have even Medicaid. And they do a great service. And they've been here in the community for 3 decades under Dr. Cook's vision and guidance. But without those kind of places, people don't even get health care.
Yeah, no. Or they end up in an emergency room waiting 6 hours to see a doctor for a headache.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to remind everybody that is going to be Thursday, August the 10th, 9 o'clock to 10:30, quarterly nonprofit roundtable. It's going to actually be held at the Homewood Suites in Davidson. So if you serve on a board of a nonprofit or you're a nonprofit, stop by. Welcome back to Good Morning LKN. I have Senator Tarte with me. Jeff Tarte has served 3 times as the mayor of Cornelius, 3 times as the senator for North Carolina.
I was just a glutton for punishment.
Jeff is the current public policy chair for the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce and the incoming board chair next year for the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce. Talk about glutton for punishment. There you go. That really does it.
Well, serving in the chamber in leadership roles is really a pleasure. It is something I enjoy, and I think everybody that serves on the executive board, it's a way to, it's a cliche, but it's a way to give back, and it's a way to stay involved, which is really, and have a seat at the table, and hopefully do good things for our community.
And Andy Yates, Persuasion Perfected, political advisor. You do a lot of digital marketing ads for candidates. Thank you for joining and sharing your perspective. Before we went to break, Andy, we were talking about the political makeup and how the voter trends have changed. We were North Mecklenburg at one point was a very solidly Republican area. It is transitioning a little bit. I think if I remember, you have probably an equal number of Democrats to Republicans, but a lot more unaffiliateds. But would you share a little bit about the voter trends?
Yeah, I think you have a lot more unaffiliated. Yeah, I was surprised looking back. You go back 5 years, it really hasn't changed that much. It has changed dramatically to more unaffiliated in the state. North Mecklenburg changed really before the rest of the state did. But one of the things you'll notice, particularly in Huntersville, is that voter behavior on the unaffiliated side has changed. Before, they were much more likely to be Republican-leaning unaffiliated, heavily participate in Republican primaries. One of the big changes is they're split now. They split their tickets more. They go back and forth. You've got more, left of center leaning unaffiliated voters. You look at both Huntersville and Cornelius. I mean, the vote's 41% unaffiliated.
Mm-hmm.
That's by far your largest segment. It's ahead of the rest of the state, and it's been 41% for at least the last 5 years. So it's not really changed as a percentage, but I think how those voters behave have changed. The big difference between Cornelius and Huntersville is in Cornelius is 36% Republican, Huntersville 30%, 28% Democrat, Cornelius 22% Democrat. So that's one of the big factors. The other thing is the turnout, particularly among Democrats in Huntersville over recent years, has been very volatile. I mean, it increased dramatically in 2017. It was up 33% from 2015 to 2017. Turnout overall, partly contributed to growth, was up in Huntersville, but the Democrat vote was up dramatically. It dropped 9% it dropped again from 17 to 19, but from 19 to 21, the Democrat turnout dropped 9%, whereas the Republican unaffiliated held steady. So that's been one of the big volatilities up here in Huntersville that's led to a lot of the volatile elections recently. I think is that fluctuation of the Democrat turnout will have a huge impact this fall to see if they're organized, to see if they turn folks out or not on the Democrat side in Huntersville.
I think we got a caller on the line, Bill. Who's our caller? Vicky, okay.
Hey, yes.
We have Senator Sawyer on the line.
Everybody.
We were just talking about transportation. Welcome, Senator Sawyer.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you guys for having me. I've really enjoyed listening to Andy's breakdown of Cornelius and Huntersville voter information, because it's just fascinating to me about the changes in our area.
It really is. I mean, it's kind of been a microcosm of the state, a little bit ahead of the curve, but the state's headed in the same direction. Republicans are kind of holding steady, losing a little bit. Democrats have lost several percentage points. Unaffiliated is ticking up. I mean, by 2028, the state overall is going to be 40% unaffiliated. So you've got to talk about those issues that appeal to people that are not in the box of one party or the other if you want to win a general election in North Carolina.
Yeah, that is completely understandable, and I hear and see that every day. And as a native North Carolinian, it seems like when we were growing up, you either rooted for Duke or Carolina. And you had two camps. I know there's some state fans who don't like what I just said, but it just seemed like we all wore the same shade of blue. We just rooted for a different team. But now everybody's on the table, right? And every issue seems to be very important to a certain sect, and it's just fascinating by the numbers, and I was appreciative of Andy's information there.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator, we were just talking about how transportation is probably going to be the number one issue that all of our communities from Statesville to Huntersville are looking at.
Yeah, and that is one of the reasons why I work so hard to be on the transportation committee, so that I can best represent our area's voice in Raleigh. You know, the state of North Carolina has the second largest centrally managed lanes of any state behind Texas. And so because we do have that centralized approach to DOT, it really is important for your local elected leaders to be able to come to the table and bring as much money home as they can to get those projects that are so important to all of us here.
Senator, can you talk to the influence that the STIP, the Strategic Transportation Improvement Plan, has had in trying to be data-driven versus the politics of getting things taken care of for my area over the old equity formula?
Right. So, you know, those of us who have been long-term Piedmontians, if that is even a word, had been, you know, upset when we go to the beach and we see these beautiful ribbons of black road and nobody on them. I think that's a story we all can tell. So when Governor McCrory came in with the General Assembly, and I think, Jeff, you were there, or Senator Tarte, you were there as well, it was very important to have a data-driven approach to road construction so that we can best meet the needs of all North Carolinians not just a few. Now, we are committed as transportation chairs in the Senate to look at the STIP again because it really is falling short of these fast-moving, growing areas, especially Huntersville, Cornelius, and Mooresville. So there are projects that are needed right now. They're not scheduled for 10 years from now. And so that's something that in the off session, we as transportation chairs are committed to looking at to see how we can best use that same system, but modify it so it can better fit our needs.
One last one I'm going to ask you is there discussion, I know, because of the change in the revenue sources? I mean, we've been focused on the gas tax, but we know with EVs and everything, what ways are we looking to change and how we're going to raise revenues to pay for our roads going forward?
Yeah, that's been one of my major initiatives, and have gotten a bipartisan group together to work on it. A couple years ago, we just transferred over the sales tax to the Department of Transportation in increments up to 6%. So that was a huge influx of cash into the transportation system. But we also are looking at, and in this budget, is going to be EV fees. They are going to look at ride share fees, and we are looking at other options. But we're also asking the agency to be better stewards of the money they have. You know, Nick Oshner just did a report about tolling on the ferries. We have a great, beautiful ferry system at the coast, but only 3 of those lines are tolled. If you and I and my family were getting tolled and go down and use Charlotte, then I think that, you know, those same folks could pay their way on the, you know, on the coast, which is not maybe very popular on the coast, but we are looking at efficiencies and budgeting. So if we're going to ask people to pay more for transportation, we have to be good stewards of the money that we're already getting.
Senator, you're a Mooresville resident. We're going to have a change in leadership in Mooresville. Miles has been the mayor for several terms. Going to be huge for Mooresville, but he has done a fantastic job in terms of his leadership.
Yeah. So he's been serving at that local level for 16 years. And for those of you who are in local politics, God bless you. That is such a very difficult thing. You know, for me, I can go to Raleigh and we make major changes at the state level, but at the local level, if your trash doesn't get picked up, that's a call, right? And that's a big issue. So I'm just so thankful for the service that he has provided to our area, but also looking forward to new leadership. And I know we have some changes in all of our state or local government as far as, you know, definitely contested races in all 3. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those elections hold.
Well, Senator Sawyer, we appreciate the job that you're doing in Raleigh, and thank you so very much for looking out for our transportation needs and making sure that we have the infrastructure to support our community.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to be on the show.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Senator Vicki Sawyer. Andy, you were talking before we took that call about the makeup of Huntersville and some of the voter trends. You want to continue to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that it is interesting is, you know, you go back to 2015, it was 35% Republican, 35% unaffiliated, 30% Democrat. Hasn't, you know, Republicans have dropped 2% to the last election. I mean, 33% Republican, 37% unaffiliated, still 30% Democrat. Not huge changes there in terms of the electorate. A couple points more unaffiliated, a couple points less Republican. But I think it's more in the behavior of how unaffiliated voters vote.
We got about 1 minute before we go into a break, and I think we have former Mayor John Annarella on the line. John, are you there?
I am.
What is your perspective? We've got a rodeo going on in Huntersville. 17 candidates for board, 3 for mayor. What's your perspective on that?
Oh, well, good morning, Bill. I didn't expect you to go right into the hard questions. Well, you know, listen, the current mayor decided not to run, so you had 2 current commissioners that wanted to run. I'm not completely surprised, them being Republicans, that a Democrat would look to run in Huntersville. It's still the largest community in North Carolina with a Republican mayor, and it's actually been that way for probably almost a quarter century. And then because those 2 commissioners left the board and 2 other commissioners decided not to run, that left 4 openings. So I think a lot of people looked at that as an opportunity to get on
John, we're gonna we're
I
against a
think-
hard break. Can you stay with us and let us come back in just a minute? Thank you for joining us.
Sure. Okay.
The new
For those of you who are streaming, we have former Mayor John Anarella on the line, and we're going to go back live with him in just a minute. John, you're still on the line right now?
I am.
We're up against the break, and those in radio land are listening to some commercials, but we're still live streaming here. You want to share some comments that you were fixing to go into with Huntersville?
Well, as I previously stated, with 4 openings, I wasn't surprised a lot of candidates applied for the commission role. I think some of them are well-intentioned, I'm sure. Some are probably not prepared for really what it means to be a commissioner. I mean, several of them didn't even have contact information or websites or, things like that. I guess my biggest concern would be, the agenda-driven or activist-driven individuals who have filed. Most of what we do at the town board level doesn't deal with social issues. It's the blocking and tackling of day-to-day. It's picking up the garbage and supporting our police and fire, getting sidewalks built, roads developed, greenways, and so forth. So my concern looking at the roster of people that are planning on running or committed to running, there are quite a few activists on there that, from my point of view, may have a social agenda that doesn't necessarily dovetail in certainly what I believe, but also with the role of the town board.
The other day, somebody brought up to me their frustration with roads and everything going on, and I pointed out that you and your board were very visionary, because right now, if you're driving around in Huntersville, you're on 115 or a Gilead Road, you see a lot of road construction going on. Those were things that over your 3 terms as mayor, you put into play. Again, road improvement doesn't happen overnight. So many of the things that we're seeing, you planned sometime in your first term. And I think you actually stayed on for a 3rd term so that you could see some of the things that you were doing put into place. But a lot of the road improvement we have is because of you and your board and the forward vision that you had.
Yeah, and the thing is that's frustrating to a lot of people. Most of the roads are state roads, so we're beholden to the state schedule. But what we did as a board 7 years ago was look at how could we accelerate some of our projects to dovetail in with the future state road projects. Some we coordinated with the state, and some we just went ahead and started building them. So there are so many road improvements that are in the hopper right now that are town funded that previously or previous boards just kind of waited around. So we tried to accelerate those projects. Ransom Road is one. There's a number on Beatties Ford Road. Every intersection on Beatties Ford Road is under some type of review for development. For improvement. And then certainly the Main Street project, which was something they talked about for 20 years. We just finally made a decision, and that should be done here in the next 6 months, my understanding.
John, we got about a minute before we go back live on the radio, and we want to keep you on for a couple of minutes after that. But let me ask you a question. Of your 6 years, 3 terms as mayor, what are you most proud about for the town of Huntersville that you had something to do with?
Well, I would say it was 2 things. One is the fiscal responsibility that we put in place over those 6 years. We were the only community in Mecklenburg County that didn't raise property taxes during that time, and actually has continued that trend. And then 2, our leadership during COVID. I feel like when COVID hit and all the restrictions came into play, and we started as a board to talk against some of those restrictions, that every business was essential and that parks should be open and various other things, I feel like that was something that probably impacted all of Mecklenburg County more than most people would realize.
That's interesting. Well, we're going to be going back live in just a minute or two. I wanted to also talk about a Chamber of Commerce activity real quick, and Bill's going to let me know how much time I have. But on Friday, August 11th, noon to 2 p.m., we have a seminar on digital influence, unlocking the business growth with content creation with radio, social media, podcasts. Justin Kozepis and the WSIC Creative Media team is going to be leading that, so that's going to be a fantastic program. We're fixing to go back live on the radio in just a few seconds.
So digital can
Mike
influence
Jackson,
behavior.
WSIC News.
Now, more stimulating talk for Lake Norman Statesville with Justin Kozepis. It's Good Morning LKN on the new 105.9, 100.7 WSIC.
Good morning, Lake Norman. Before we went on break, we had former Mayor John Annarella on the line. John is still with us. John, I want to ask you a question. One of the things that I've always admired about you is sometimes you have politicians and sometimes you have elected officials. And some of those politicians, you can go to a town board meeting and you're pretty sure you have 4 or 5 commissioners and they're going to vote a certain way. And all of a sudden, 30 people show up from a HOA and you watch those votes slip. Or they look at all the comments on social media and that impacts their decision. That wasn't your case. I mean, you stood your ground on a number of issues, sometimes very unpopular issues with some folks, and you said this is the way we're going to go. Particularly, I remember on the charter school bill that we had. But let me ask you a question. How much do you think social media and those people showing up at town boards influence in their decision making, and how much should it?
Well, I would say too much sometimes, because when you look at the totality of the community, 70,000 people, you really have to take that whole view under, just scrutiny instead of just listening to 5 or 10 people on social media. So I think the hard thing is that, you do have people that come at you and they might have all one point of view, but you really have to think through that and what is in the best interest of the whole community. So, for example, I took a lot of heat back when during COVID, we were the leading town in terms of, hey, these restrictions are too restrictive. And I was getting a lot of pushback from certain people, but to look at all the businesses that were being restricted and all the harm that was being done, we just had to keep our blinders on and really talk about, hey, these Mecklenburg County restrictions are onerous to our constituents.
Thank you, John, and thank you for your leadership. Any last comment about particularly the race in Huntersville or any other race that you would like to talk about?
Well, like I said, I'm a little concerned in Huntersville that certain people, including Ms. Clark, who I've had a good relationship with in the past, are more activists, social activists, and that's not really the role that the town government plays. So, people pay attention, get out there and vote. The most important elections are the one in front of you, and it's also the one that touches you every day, which is your town board.
Mayor Annarella, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for what you continue to do out there in our community. We appreciate it, and thank you for joining us this morning.
All right.
For those of you who can, 844-STUDIO-4, 844-STUDIO-4, if you want to call into the station and talk with Andy, Jeff, or myself and share some comments that you might have regarding your community, 844-STUDIO-4. Before we had the call from Senator Sawyer and Mayor Annarella, you were talking about the voter trends. Did you finish, or you have some more comments regarding Huntersville?
I think we kind of wrapped it up, but I mean, the thing that jumped out to me is the volatility in the Democrat turnout. And I think that's what's going to impact a lot of the vote in Huntersville this time. Republicans as a percentage of the electorate, unopposed percentage of the electorate, has stayed relatively steady. With the exception of 2018, Republican turnout as a percentage was down a little bit, but that was because Democrat percentages spiked in 17 and 19. So I think that's and particularly in 19, there was a big spike in the Democrat turnout that hurt Republicans. But it's really that Democrat turnout's very volatile in Huntersville. That and the changes in how unaffiliates behave. They're no longer basically Republicans. They truly are more swing voters who may, vote RDR or DRD. They're looking at the different candidates, individual issues. And again, I don't know that people take as partisans of a lens when they look at these municipal elections, because the issues are not as partisan as they are at the state legislative level or even the county commission level. Could change in Huntersville this time with Christy Clark on the ballot, who's coming from that state level, being on the state level as a state house member and a candidate for state house to running for mayor. It'd be interesting to see the approach she decides to take.
Did that surprise you?
I mean, it did and it didn't. I mean, I've told people that she's she would be the most formidable Democrat that could run if she decided to do it. It seemed like
because of name recognition.
Because of name recognition, yeah, and she's got experience raising money. She's, she knows what it takes to run a tough competitive campaign. I thought she was committed to the state house race, but there's some volatility there. We don't know what the districts are going to look like. That may have played a factor in her mind. You're not going to know that until October, November. She said that she felt like you needed more choices in Huntersville. That may very well be the reason. I tend to look at things more cynical when people take changes like that. I'm guessing it probably has to do with redistricting, political climate, what's going on in Raleigh, all that sort of thing. And Republicans in supermajority look like they're going to stay there. Raleigh's not a pleasant place to be for a Democrat right now, so I'm sure that factors into the thinking there too.
And go ahead, Jeff.
One thing I was going to say about the voter registration impacts voting, I'll be the advocate on the other side, or the thorn under the saddle is, I think voters are very fickle and they don't do their homework as a general rule. So you get either a single issue that people do get interested in and do get educated on that drives them to vote, or they get to the polls. Judges are a classic example. Most people don't have a clue who the judges are, and they wait for somebody to pass out a voter card to tell them which party, because they still vote inordinately by party, because that gives you some indication of whether they're philosophically and ideologically aligned with your beliefs. But in North Carolina, 6 years ago, we passed where there are now more people who have moved into North Carolina than people born in the state, which is an interesting phenomenon because that changes the voter patterns as well. Then you look at the fact that there's more unaffiliateds than either registered party. So as Paul Shoemaker said recently, who is very active in politics and helping candidates, you're not going to win a race in North Carolina if you don't carry the unaffiliates. They're going to decide who serves in which offices going forward. There was a study done in October of 2018 by the National Council of State Legislators in elections, particularly blue moon elections when we don't have statewide races going on, that what individual candidates' track record has zero influence on the voter. The parties at the state levels, the things they've done, has zero impact on the election of individual races. What decides who's getting voted and elected is the party that is in the White House. The opposite party wins all the elections as a general rule, unless you're just in a heavy district that's predominant by one party.
There's a reason why the Democrat turnout jumped 33% from 15 to 17, and it's because Donald Trump won the presidential election in 2016. And it got Democrats energized. I got door knocks on my door. I live in Huntersville, McCauley. I got door knocks on my door for municipal elections from Democrat Party, Democrat candidates in 2017. The only time that's ever happened in the decade I've lived here.
And the one thing I want to pick up on Mayor Annarella's comment, which I think is absolutely imperative, is now is not the time to elect activists into office, particularly at the municipal level. If you take Cornelius, $38 million budget, 138 employees. Davidson, $19 million budget, 100 plus employees. Huntersville is a $110 million business with 231 employees. Politics, the definition is, we think back room and smoke-filled rooms and deals. Politics is nothing more than this art and science of managing a public organization. And we need professionals that can do that in these large businesses or our communities.
We're going to go to a break in just a second. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the things happening in the Iredell County, Mooresville, Troutman, Statesville. You're listening to WSIC. Good morning, Lake Norman. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Jeff Tarte, Andy Yates, and Bill Russell. Thank you for being with us this morning.
More.
Okay, cool. To cover candidates in Huntersville. For those of you who are streaming with us, thank you for staying with us. We're going to be going back and talking a little bit about more of the Huntersville candidates, and we're also going to get into some of the Iredell County elections. Talking about Chamber of Commerce activities again, the Leadership Lake Norman program is going to be taking place over the next 8 months. Applications for Leadership Lake Norman is being accepted up until September 8th. Andy, that's something that you've been looking at going into Leadership Lake Norman. You were going to do it one time before, got involved in a campaign. Second time, I think COVID kind of kept you out of Leadership Lake Norman. Why have you been interested in going into Leadership Lake Norman?
I think I've known a number of people that have done it, and they've spoken about the value of being in the program and getting to learn more about the great things going on where we live, what makes Lake Norman run, what makes Lake Norman tick. I think it's a great preparation for what I do professionally, but it's also just a chance to see more about what happens here, how I can get more involved, give more back to the community. I'm very excited to finally get to do it. 2 years ago, COVID got me. Last year, the election got me. So this year, I'm really looking forward to it, as well as my promised stay at the Russell Farm that I'm probably going to get to cash in on.
Leadership is a program that our Chamber of Commerce runs, but there is a Leadership Mooresville, Leadership Cabarrus County, Leadership Statesville. So, and what leadership is about is an opportunity, if you're a newcomer, to find out about your community over a course of about 8 months, from everything from government to history, healthcare, economic development, community infrastructure. And again, our chambers of commerce, most all of the chambers put on a leadership program, and it's an outstanding program. We also have a junior Leadership Lake Norman, closely modeled on Leadership Lake Norman for high school juniors. So if you have a rising junior in high school, whether it's a Lake Norman High School or even homeschool, Jeff, you can participate in Junior Leadership Lake Norman. Information on both of those programs can be found at lakenormanchamber.org. I've been told by Bill on the boards that Representative John Bradford, District 98, is on the phone. And when we get back from break, we're going to go straight over to John and share his insight on what's going on in Lake Norman and maybe even in Raleigh, too. Bill, how much time we have? 25 seconds. That's not enough for Jeff Tarte to get wound up. So, Jeff, Andy, thank you very much for being with us this morning and sharing your insight. We're going to go back in 10 seconds or so. Thank you.
Good morning, LKN continues now on WSIC. News, talk, now.
Welcome back to Good Morning Lake Norman, and thank you, Jeff Tarte, for joining us, a three-term senator in North Carolina, Andy Yates, Persuasion Perfected. And we have on the line Representative John Bradford, who is District 98. John, thank you so much for your leadership, but what do you think's going on here in your District 98? It's going to be kind of competitive out there in Cornelius and Huntersville.
Hey, yes, good morning, Bill, Andy, Senator Tarte. Well, I mean, right now, I mean, it will be competitive. Obviously, we know that the current Huntersville mayor, Melinda Bales, has announced that she's running. Of course, there's a lot of time between now and the end of the year before you can actually file for a race. So, I guess it remains to be seen if someone else on the Republican side wants to run for that seat. And if someone files, then, of course, there'll be a primary. And if not, then Melinda will clear primary and head on to the general. On the Democrat side, we have kind of an interesting turn in events. I think maybe surprising, but if you really break it down, maybe not as surprising as you'd think. But Christy Clark, who edged me out, let's see, I guess 5 years ago. She won a term, so she went, kind of came from obscurity and then became a representative. And then the next term she lost, and the next term she lost, and she had already declared she was running again against me. Now, of course, this was before I decided to, put my hat in for the state treasurer role. But she drew a primary, which was kind of interesting because, I had sort of heard whisperings that within her own party, people, weren't real crazy with her. And so I think that was demonstrated by the fact that she did draw a primary within her own party. And so she was facing a primary on the Democrat side. And then, of course, whoever would have won that would take on whoever wins the primary on the Republican side. But as of late, I don't know if it was earlier this week, just a few days ago, she announced that, Christy Clark announced that she's running for the Huntersville mayor spot, which now means for District 98, at the moment, there's one person running, and her name is Lisa Jewell. And I don't know Lisa well. I stood with her at the polls, and so I just got a chance to, sort of casually chat with her. So it looks like she, at the moment, is the only Democrat running. But again, there's a lot of time left. And based on the signaling from Christie's announcement letter for mayor, she seemed to take a shot over the bow at Lisa without naming her. So it seems as though perhaps Christie and her team are going to work hard to try to find someone to run against Lisa in a primary. So I think there's an interesting thing going on within our local Democrat party here.
John, a question, which a lot of candidates have the ability to do because of split years between municipal and statewide, is Christie just testing the water? If she gets elected mayor, good, she's 4 years. But if she loses, she'll turn potentially right back around and run for the House, will she not?
Senator Tarte, there's no doubt that door is not closed. I would just say that, she has she's run for office 3 times and she's been successful only once. And that was largely because, and I'm certainly not trying to take anything away from her individually, but I will say it was the year that every single Republican in the urban areas in the House of Representatives lost that year. Not a single Republican in the House from both Wake County and Mecklenburg County. Everyone lost. It was a very interesting cycle. It was Trump's midterm cycle. I would say the suburban mom was basically, they were not thrilled with what Trump was tweeting at the time. And so there was sort of a referendum against Republicans in urban areas that cycle, and Christie was able to ride that wave. But once she went to Raleigh and actually everyone saw how radically left she was, her record has prevented her from being able to get back. So she has 2 losses now, and if she were to run for mayor and lose, that'd be yet another loss. Could she run for the House again? Yes, but I think people are just realizing, that perhaps she should just stay in the private sector.
Well, and we recognize in history one of the most famous persons who ran and consistently lost 11 straight elections before winning his 12th was Abraham Lincoln. Pretty important last one to win.
Yeah. Well, even Newt Gingrich has lost a few times, So, look, I've lost a race, right? And so, it happened. But I don't know. I think could she do that, Senator Tarte? Absolutely. I don't think the optics would look good, and I think any opponent running against her would absolutely. You'd see that on some postcards. Andy could speak to that.
I'm just going to throw one last thing out because you mentioned Melinda, obviously right now being the only one to run. But I think she's going to catch a primary as well, and I think that person could potentially be Karen Bentley.
Well, Karen obviously has history of public service. She was a Mecklenburg County commissioner. She's also chairwoman of the 12th district at the moment. I do know the 2 of them have talked. It's interesting. I'm friends. Jeff or Senator Tarte, as I should say. We become good friends with all these folks, and so I know the 2 of them have talked, and I don't think that's. I don't think that's an impossible scenario for sure. That very well could play out. But who knows?
Representative Bradford, we appreciate the job that you're doing in Raleigh, but particularly on the issues you're covering, transportation and other things that you're doing. But thank you very much for your service at District 98, and good luck in your race for state treasurer.
Well, I appreciate that, y'all. I really do.
Thank you, John. Bill, you said we have another caller on the line. Bobby, go ahead. You're talking to Good Morning Lake Norman.
Hey, y'all, I appreciate the show and everything this morning, but did I miss the word of the day?
The word of the day is commitment. Bill, do you want to share your word of the day?
I can certainly do that.
All right, what's your word of the day, Bill?
Our word of the day today is cogent.
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 Can you use that in a sentence for us?
Why, of course. Why, of course. At the town meeting, citizens presented many cogent arguments in support of building a new senior center. Cogent.
Would that be concise?
Concise is right in there. Yeah.
Okay.
I like that. Any guests from any of our guest hosts or special guests?
Cogent. Senator Tarte.
You want me to use it in a phrase?
What,
or my
no,
word of the
what do you
day?
think it means, cogent?
Cogent.
He knows.
Well, I guess it means clarity.
Clarity?
From one perspective, and being again, concise is a very good term. But cogent means it's something that's clear, that you have clarity and know exactly what you're.
I think we nailed that one, Bill.
Yeah, you definitely did. You definitely did.
Bobby, did we nail it?
I mean, that sounds right. That sounds pretty good. I mean, let's say Justin and the Buffer. I mean, they really helped me with my vocabularistics and all. So I appreciate it. I thank y'all.
Bobby,
have a good one.
All right, thank you, Bobby, for calling in.
Yes, cogent definition is convincing.
There you go. Well,
Yep.
we appreciate that. And for my guest host today, yes, there's a word of the day every day that Justin and Bill go back and forth on, and I've enjoyed listening to that as well. Before we took the call from Representative Bradford, we were talking about the candidates. Can you share some of the candidates that are running in Huntersville?
I can, and I think, I want to go back to the comments first with the mayors, because I think that's going to be interesting. We'll see whether, as you talked about, people do their homework and understand there are party affiliations, and will Dan and Derek split the vote, and does that allow Christie to sneak in, if you will? But it's, again, going to determine on the unaffiliates. And as I think John had mentioned, and maybe you, Andy, with Christie, and I will say this to her credit, having worked with her on the other side of the aisle, she is actually one that listens, she engages, she's polite, she's respectful of the other side of the aisle.
Absolutely.
And there's very few people that are willing to do that. And so I give her tons of credit for her ability to work and listen, even though we have different solutions to the same problem or approaches to the solution. So that will be interesting. I think one thing I want to call out, and people need to be aware of, is I think Commissioner Partee is getting a lot of flack in the community over racial issues. And that is so completely out of line for this day and age. And that crap has to stop and needs to stop. He is a marvelous candidate with background, as is Dan. I mean, you got three really strong candidates, but it's time to evaluate and measure people on what they bring to the table and their skill sets and stuff. Now, onto the commissioners, it will be interesting because Huntersville has a breadth of skill sets that are being brought to the table. And I think this is more of a note for the candidates running. As Andy said, a lot of it's name recognition, right? How do you get people to understand your positions on issues to the extent that they care about particular issues? And what's your background? What's your skill sets that you bring to the table for people? And so how do you get that homework? For me, I started by going on social media. I looked at all 17 candidates to see what they had in terms of websites from their campaign perspective. I looked at their social media, most particularly, obviously, Facebook's an easy one that we all jump to because you get a real sense of people, if they've been on for a while, what they're messaging, what they're passionate about. But more importantly, for me, I go to LinkedIn because I wanted to look at what kind of professional background and what you've really been doing in the community, short-term and long-term. It's, it's sort of your characters determine what you do when you're not being watched and how you react. So that becomes important. And I think, their involvement on boards and other things, other than just, I want to be a commissioner today. I woke up and said yes. But before we get into individuals, I think I want to tip the hat to everyone who is willing to put their name in the ring and run for office. That is a spectacularly good thing, and it's a hard thing to do. So more power to all of them for their willingness try to run for office.
I think Bill mentioned his word of the day was commitment. I think Jeff would agree. If you run for local office, you need to be committed.
Yeah, definitely committed.
We're actually going to go to a break and hear from some of our sponsors. Those of you who are streaming, stay with us. We'll be back with Jeff Tarte and Andy Yates on Good Morning LKN on WSIC. I'm your host, Bill Russell. You were going to say something, Mr. Tarte.
I'd say I don't know how much we want to get into some of the individual candidates and talk about just general backgrounds and things, so people will be a little educated from our program.
Right. As we're on this, and those of you who are streaming with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and the station WSIC, thanks for being with us. Jeff, you are our public policy chair over the course of the last couple of years. You've been bringing in some fantastic speakers. You shared a little bit a while ago about our Focus Fridays. You have elevated that in a way that is just off the charts. You know, we used to have on the Focus Friday on the third Friday every month, 8 o'clock. It was 8 o'clock then at the Chamber of Commerce to about 9:30. And then COVID hit. And, you know, I'm not a huge fan of Zoom and virtual things. I really believe networking, you really need to build relationships in person. However, one of the things that allowed us to do, we used to have, 20 people show up at a Focus Friday. That was a pretty good crowd. But now, as you just mentioned, we're going to be able to get people like Speaker, the House Speaker come in and talk about things going on. And he can do it from Raleigh. He doesn't have to travel down. So Speaker Moore will be here. We've had Senator Burr, and we've had some of the Lieutenant Governor. We have Josh Stein.
Well, as you said, coming up, we've got obviously the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The next month, we have the Attorney General, who's actually running for governor. The month after that, we have a congressman who's in the Freedom Pack in Washington, D.C., Dan Bishop, who was very instrumental involved in the Speaker's election with McCarthy. After that, we've got U.S. Senator Ted Budd. So it's people who are impacting us, our businesses in the region directly, and without the technology and Zoom, it'd be very difficult to get these people.
And not only elected officials, we've had the president of CPCC.
We have. Candy Diedemeyer has been on and talking about education. We've had people like John Marino, who is the CEO and founder of OMB, business leaders, and we had and will have leaders from our healthcare community and our hospitals in the region. So people are willing to share their vision and message and what's going on in the community from their perspective.
And I'm not saying this because Jeff's sitting across from the table from me, but it's my favorite program that the Chamber does. You really do get a chance to hear from people whose decisions impact our lives every day in a relatively small setting, and you get to ask them questions. And that's not an opportunity that many people have. So it's something that I hope people will continue to take advantage of.
Again, we have that on the third Friday of each month, 8:30 to 9:30. It is Zoom. It is primarily for Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce members. However, we allow people to join us. And it's also stored on YouTube. So if you go to Lake Norman Chamber's YouTube and you put in Lake Norman Chamber and Focus Friday, you'll see some of the programs. Paul Shoemaker was our guest last Friday, and I thought that was an outstanding presentation.
If you don't do anything else, if you're a political wonk, you need to go back, pull it up on social media, look for Lake Norman Chamber Focus Friday with Paul Shoemaker. He runs campaigns and data and analytics for governors around the country, for U.S. senators, for House members. He's plugged in to a great degree. Interestingly enough with Paul, is he identifies himself. He's a marketing executive who happens to be the product that he helps market and sell our elected officials.
Yeah, and that's the approach you've got to take in today's world. And that's unfortunately why you don't get into some of the deep issue discussions that people want, because you don't have time to do that. You got to build name ID, build positives, and get people to like you. And I mean, that's a lot of it is a great big popularity contest.
Andy, how much is still the rule that the golden rule is two things in an election: drive your favorables up and drive your opponent's negatives up?
It's absolutely that way, particularly in a head-to-head election. If you got two candidates squaring off, that's largely what it's about in a competitive race. There's so many races now where the dynamics of party registration and demographics determine who's going to win before you ever get there on the general election side. But it's a lot about that.
Well, again, thank you, Jeff, for putting together that Focus Friday. Again, anybody who is interested in that, you can go to our Lake Norman Chamber YouTube page and put in Lake Norman Chamber Focus Friday, and you can see some of the speakers that we've had. We're fixing to go back live on the radio in just a few seconds.
Randy Marion Ford Lincoln, again, you know where we are. Look for that spinning car, folks, because that is where the deals are.
The #1 news station for Lake Norman and Statesville. News Talk WSIC.
Now, more stimulating talk for Lake Norman, Statesville with Justin Kazepis. It's Good Morning LKN on the new 105.9, 100.7 WSIC.
Welcome back to Good Morning LKN. Justin is on vacation. We heard from him earlier, but he's enjoying the day at the beach. I have former Senator Jeff Tarte, also a 3-term mayor of Cornelius, Andy Yates, persuasion perfected, a political consultant. We were just sharing before we went to a break sort of the makeup of Huntersville and some of the candidates that are running down there, Jeff.
Yeah, again, as I'd mentioned before the break, that I was just doing the classic citizen to say how I need to get educated on these candidates and who's done what, and just started doing my homework. And it's fascinating what you run into background-wise. One of my favorites is Amber Kovacs. She's on the chamber executive board, so I'm a little biased, and the fact that she ran. But here's a person who's basically a school teacher, got involved, went to the University of Florida. So again, out of state, taught in Florida for like 8 or 9 years. She's moved to Huntersville only in 2020. She's a relatively new resident, and she finds herself as a town commissioner now. So there are no prescribed cookbook approaches that will guarantee you getting a seat, and no necessary background that will prevent you from serving.
Jeff, when you ran for mayor, you were coming, I think you were involved in Parks and Rec Board, both locally with Cornelius and Mecklenburg County. So it isn't that you didn't have any experience, but you didn't go a commissioner route. You went straight for mayor.
I did. But again, I'd served for like 6 to 8 years at the town Park and Rec Commission, then chaired that. And then I served 8 years on the Mecklenburg County. And then there's a number of other boards and activities that I did that were directly related to the community that I was involved in. So I'm biased. I think if I had a preference of candidates, I'd look for people who have served in community activities or boards that feed into the board. For me, for the mayor, it was the ability to, as one of my favorite definitions of leadership, is the ability to influence and direct others in a common vision and direction. And mayors, governors, the executive side, if you will, it's a persuasion thing. You don't have direct control in boards. And I think it's important for people to recognize the municipalities, the town boards. They don't run the town. The town staff and the town manager, that's the CEO and the COO and the employees of the business, being the town. What the commissioners and the mayors are, they're the board of directors, literally, and the chairman of the board, and setting direction and vision. Towns in North Carolina, mayors, as a general rule, only can hire and fire 3 people: the town clerk, the town attorney, and the town manager. Now, you can influence having somebody fired below, because you tell the town manager, if you don't fire that person, guess who's going away?
Sure.
Yeah.
844-STUDIO-4, 844-STUDIO-4 if you wanted to call in. Andy, how informed do you think most voters are when they show up, say, the town of Huntersville? Are they coming in, they know what they're going to do for mayor, maybe of the 6 commissioners, they feel strongly for 3 or 4. How informed do you think the average voter is?
I think that's right. I think your approach is right. I think most of them have an idea if they're voting. If they're the 10% that vote, unfortunately, in a municipal election, 15% in a good year, they have an idea of who they're voting for mayor. It's usually a little bit higher profile election. They're familiar with those folks. They have a good concept there. On the town board commissioners, it's all over the place. Some people may have all 6. Some, it's 1 or 2. Their neighbors running, their friends running. They know that an Amber or a Stacy or a Dan Boone or Rob Kidwell, etc., is really passionate about the same issue they are. That's their motivation, who they're voting for. Some it's 3 or 4, but they get in there and they feel like they've got to vote for 6 in Huntersville, for example, or 5 in Cornelius, and they go in and they're voting for people they don't know a whole lot about. They may know one thing about those folks. They may have heard somebody else say they're a good guy. They feel like they've got to vote for all of those. One thing people don't realize is you don't. The way the machines are set up, it makes you feel like you got to vote for all the spots. You don't. And in some ways that's a vote as well, and it gives a little more weight to your vote for the people that you really want to get on the board when you don't vote for all the spots.
We know about the power of incumbency, particularly on a federal and state level. How important is incumbency to the local level?
I think it's maybe not quite as important as it is at that level, but I think it's a big factor because it lends itself to more name ID. There's more opportunities to get known. Now you had turnabout last time in Cornelius. You had 4 of the 5 incumbents voted out. A lot of people would tell you the only reason the 5th incumbent didn't get voted out is there were only 4 challengers. You had people that were upset, not even necessarily at anybody in particular. They were upset about growth and some of the things that were going on, and you banded together and turned out the existing board. That's unusual. Most of these folks serve for as long as they want when they get on there as incumbents, unless they do something really bad or there's a big swing in power. That's why we still talk about Rusty Knox beating John Wood. That's why people still talk about when Mayor Annarella beat then Mayor Jill Swain. It's because those are the exceptions and not the norm. If it happened every time, we wouldn't be talking about elections from 8 years ago. We were different.
We were talking about development projects, and I read that article the other day that said, why is the Chamber of Commerce supporting this particular project when there are so many citizens against it? And you might have 200-300 people in a town of Huntersville be against something. But we're a community of 70,000 people. And I have folks telling me all the time they're for particular projects, but the people who usually are for things, they don't write about it on social media. They don't come out to town board meetings and voice their opinion. They're sort of the silent people out there. But oftentimes you need to be, as a commissioner, you need to be looking at, is this going to benefit my community, not what these dozen people are saying at a town board meeting.
You've got to look at both of it. I mean, the passion is there more on the negative side. And at the local level, you're not used to hearing from people on most of the issues you vote about. So when you hear from 10 or 15 people about one particular issue and they're all in agreement, that gets these folks worried. And it makes, and you can, that's a call to action to everybody out there to pay more attention at the local level. Email your town council members, call them, go see them, set up a meeting with them, because you can really have influence there, because they don't hear from a ton of folks on a lot of these issues. And it's a tough balance to whether you take that big picture approach or you look at where the noise is being, and is that noise reflective? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but you've got to look at that. And you've also, we could debate all day long whether or not this is right, but you got to look at the political consideration side of it. These folks, if they're smart, they understand who their voters are and how they got elected. And it may not be that they feel like the majority of the town feels this way, but they may feel like it's the majority of the people they need to get reelected. And re-election is a real motivation for folks. Maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't, but people want to get reelected.
Well, and that's not all bad. I mean, one of the funny things is people were saying, there's a small group and they're vocal.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't listen to them. I thought the whole purpose was, as elected officials, you're supposed to listen to your constituents, and so it's this dichotomy. But it's, as it was pointed out by one of the former mayors, it's the NIMBY issue, especially in a municipal area, not in my backyard. Are you hearing only from the people who didn't want something literally in their backyard, and are you listening to all your constituents?
I think that's important. I think you have to look at projects, engage that. I mean, that's something, some of these projects are only opposed by the people that live right around it. Maybe that's because there is going to cause them big problems. But then some of them you see opposition throughout the community. I mean, I see in my neighborhood in McCauley, people weighing in on the Laguna issue all the time. And it's way on the other side of Huntersville. It's not an area that I personally drive by a lot. I don't know that it would have a huge effect on the daily lives of a whole lot of people in McCauley, but there seems to be a lot of passion on that particular project.
And there's classic examples. When we put this sailing center in next to Blythe Landing, all the neighbors were totally against it until it went in, and they go, man, this is nice, because it was quiet. They didn't think it. Burkdale's another example, though, with North American Properties. You had a group of 20, 25 people animately opposed to it. None of them lived in Huntersville. So do you do your homework and know who's really opposed or for a project?
And I think the other thing, though, I think there's a lesson in there for the development community too. Bill and I have talked about this before. I think some of these developers are going to have to realize that they need to go into these communities before they go to the town, before it comes out in public, and sell the neighbors on this is a good project and why, and ask them, what would you like to see change? And if it's realistic, maybe make some of those changes and be responsive. Because once the opposition is organized, the project is usually dead.
Andy, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Iredell County politics. You're listening to Good Morning LKN. I'm your host, Bill Russell. Come back and join us.
Or just come back.
There's more good.
For those of you streaming, thank you for staying with us. Senator Tarte, kind of the same question that I asked John Anarella a little while ago of your 3 terms as mayor and then your 3 terms in the Senate. Let's start with Cornelius. What are you most proud of having served as mayor 3 terms in Cornelius?
We can talk about widening West Catawba. We can talk about building a new or a new fire station. We can talk about taking our police and making it the flagship CALEA, which put us in the top 1% of all police stations, police forces. We can talk about going from a AA to a AAA bond. We can talk about, going to having the lowest tax rate in the state with the most coverage of our fire and police. There's a lot of things, but here's what I'm proud of, is that we created an environment with all the cynicism that exists in serving in elected office and against politicians, that we elevated the type of people and business people and professionals, solid teachers, executives that were willing to go and run and serve, and how we treat those people generally today. And I think that's a very important thing. And then that we get the community to engage with our elected officials to address issues head on.
And I think to your credit, to the Chamber's credit, Mayor Washam's credit, a number of other folks, Senator Tillis, I think, is a big reason behind this. Cornelius is one of the most engaged communities I see in the state. I mean, the business community engages, the local leaders step forward, and I think that's something that Cornelius can be proud of. And as somebody who lives in Huntersville, I'm a little envious of that.
Well, what was nice with Cornelius, and I think other communities, we can be kind of a guidepost, is engaging the citizens to solve problems. Our animal shelter was a chain link fence with a tarp. We ended up building a full service, non-kill shelter during my time. That is a massive positive, and that's the citizens doing that kind of activity. We had water issues. We were getting billed out the wazoo. We put together a group of experts and people in the community. They went and solved it working with Charlotte Water. We did the same thing with the revow when it first came out. We had stuff totally messed up in the revaluation process, hadn't been looked at in 40 years. Cornelius was the center of changing that and getting that fixed.
Yeah, and it's going out and being proactive to get, because everybody's busy. Everybody has things they're passionate about. Most people, we're the oddballs. Most people are not passionate about public service and local government like we are. So you've got to go out and proactively engage folks.
We're going to wind this down. For those of you streaming, thank you for doing so. We're going back live in about 10 seconds.
Birthdays, anniversaries, and have a lot of fun in the process. Weekday mornings from 9 to 11 here on News Talk WSIC.
All the news, one station. News Talk WSIC.
Now, more Good Morning LKN with Justin Kazepis on the new 105.9, 100.7 WSIC.
Welcome back to Good Morning LKN. You're with Senator Jeff Tarte and Andy Yates, Bill Russell. We're recapping what's going on with the filing. But before I do that, Andy, huge event this past weekend, Big Day at the Lake. You were there with me. Big Day at the Lake, not only did they have a number of littles from Big Brothers Big Sisters come out, they raised $143,761. Wow. I think is a record. Dave Yoakum and his group, Tracy, his wife, Jim Duke, all of those involved, all of the volunteers. It's a massive undertaking. 19th year of Big Day at the Lake. You were out there. What was your impression of the event?
I mean, I don't personally think there's a better event that happens in the Lake Norman community in terms of giving back, both what they do that day and what they raise. It was great enthusiasm. It's great to see it really has fully recovered from COVID. COVID did a lot of damage to our charity events and things like that. And Big Day at the Lake has fully bounced back. And that's great to see. And one of the great things to see, too, is all the different civic organizations and groups that are out there working together. It really brings the whole community together. Your Kiwanis groups, your Rotary groups, your different groups like that sometimes tend to work in their own silos. And Dave and Tracy have done a great job of bringing the whole community together, getting them behind one cause. And it's kind of like, it's almost like it's the adopted event of the entire community. And the Boys and Girls Club from the whole county benefits from it. I think it's just a great day.
Senator, you live on the water. Have you served as a boat host before?
Multiple times, and very engaged with Big Brothers Big Sisters through Big Day at the Lake. It is one of our premier charities and groups, and they impact on the kids that don't have an adult necessarily, or only a single parent in their family that this group does. It's one of the organizations actually the state got behind. When I was in the Senate, we were able to bring $200,000 to the organization in 1 year for them. And it's life-changing. You listen to the stories of these kids and now that are adults, the fascinating thing and maybe the most exciting thing is to see littles that are now bigs and giving back.
That tells you when a group's being really successful. When the people that served go on to become the ones volunteering to serve, that tells you when a group's really had a positive impact.
Dave and Tracy Yoakum, a fantastic job. 19 years. Now coming up on the 20th big day, be held July of 2024. But and Andy, thank you and the Kiwanis for being out there and helping out. Before we went to break, we were just going to shift our attention. Any last things to say about Huntersville before we go over to Iredell County?
Yeah, I stay active and engaged in the Chamber of Commerce.
Free plug.
Thank you very much for that. Andy, let's talk about what's happening in Mooresville and in Statesville. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, I think, I think it's kind of different dynamics. Statesville is a little unusual around here because you've got 4-year terms for city council mayor with staggered elections. So this is sort of a down year for them. Mayor's not up at large. Their at-large town board members are not up. So it's a little bit more of a quiet election. They had quite a bit of excitement 2 years ago when they had some overturn on that large members, and the mayor had to go to a runoff to win. So that was a big year for them. It's more quiet in Statesville now. Mooresville, on the other hand, you're going to see a new mayor for the first time in well over a decade. I think Vicky said that Senator Sawyer, I should say, said that Mayor Atkins has served for something like 16 years. I mean, it's remarkable for anybody to serve in that role for that long, and you have to appreciate that. But you're going to see a new direction up there. You're going to see new guidance, new leadership. They're struggling with the same issues that that Huntersville, Cornelius, Davidson are struggling with. The suburban communities around Raleigh struggle with the same issues. And it's how do you handle the growth? It's how do you, Justin's probably right when he called it earlier, you're probably never going to catch up. But the struggle is how you get there, and it's the vision on that. There's anger over an apartment complex is driving a lot of the vote in Mooresville. Mooresville's still, you're reliably, and Iredell's still very reliably Republican county, very, reliably Republican town. So you're going to see somebody who's Republican probably is mayor, the majority of their town commissioners, people that think right of center, but it's still going to be how that approach is, and the growth issue doesn't fall nicely along partisan lines. So that's they're struggling with the same stuff we are, and growth doesn't stop, crime doesn't stop, infrastructure, traffic needs don't stop at the town board line. So we've got to work together on this sort of stuff.
And we're close in proximity because of the lake, so we get looked at as the Lake Norman region, and Mooresville's clearly part of that. But they're unique. Huntersville's getting closer because of their size, but Mooresville still has major corporations. So when you have a Lowe's in your background, you really are influenced by NASCAR in your backyard.
Absolutely.
That is not quite to the same extent the other Lake Norman communities are.
And you've got the whole, old Mooresville east of 77 dynamic versus the west of 77 new Mooresville dynamic. You got people that Mooresville was larger before it started growing than any other town. So you've got more people that have been there forever, and it's that competing interest there as well, and where the resources go.
And I think, from a county perspective, the influence on politics relative to Statesville and the north and Mooresville, very different.
It's very different. it's almost like I mean, when you look at county-wide stuff in Iredell County, it's almost like 3 to 4 different counties. I mean, Statesville's your traditional southern small town, not seeing a ton of growth, still growing, but not seeing a ton of growth over the years that used to dominate the county. Mooresville's where all the growth's happening now. You got North Iredell, which is very rural. It's more like probably Yadkin or Surrey County than it is the rest of Iredell. And then you've got Troutman, which is kind of stuck in the middle between Mooresville and Statesville. You got really 4 different dynamics that you have to look at in Iredell County.
Troutman's
very different needs.
Troutman's going to be completely different in a few years.
Oh, it's about to explode.
Small town, but they've passed going to put a development that will increase the population 8-fold.
Mm-hmm.
Their taxes to support that ended up being equivalent to Davidson.
Jeez.
Mooresville also has a school board election going on up there, I believe.
They do, and I mean, and those are, the school boards. I was talking with someone in actually a different state about this yesterday, who's a client of mine. But the school board elections is an interesting phenomenon all over right now, because these were elections 5 years ago. Very little interest. It was a name ID race. Didn't raise a ton of money. It was who had the most volunteers at the polls and probably who had the most yard signs were going to win. And now with all the various issues in schools, from funding to the culture issues and everything else, school board races are exploding with interest. People are jumping into those races. They're spending real money. Voters are really finally realizing how important these school board elections are in deciding the direction that our schools are going to go in.
Here's the anomaly, though, and it is wild. Chapel Hill Schools, school board, 4 open positions. Nobody filed to run.
That's crazy. I mean, it's a job I personally wouldn't want to do. I respect the people that do it, but it's such an emotional and personal issue when you start talking about people's children. School board could be especially now they're getting more attention, could be the toughest job in politics, because it's the most personal for people and it's the closest to home.
Andy, not even Labor Day, I'm already getting mailers in the mailbox for candidates. How much does direct mail influence voters on an election?
I mean, I think it's one of several things that have an impact. It's not as much as it used to be, because people are able. There's more ways now that you can reach voters, but people wouldn't spend the money on it if it doesn't work. The numbers show that it's one of the most effective ways to reach folks. It can be highly targeted. You can have the taglines for the people that just glance at it. You have the details for people that need details. Do a lot of stuff with imagery, and it's one of those ways where whoever's paying for that mail gets to control the message. And that's important for folks. I mean, you shouldn't be dishonest with folks. People are sometimes, but but when you control the message, you get to control what part of the story's told. You can be honest, but only tell the part of the story you want people to hear.
And it's interesting for candidates to learn and listen from the professionals like yourselves that do these pieces. Like my old business and technical writing professor told me at university was, you got 7 words to capture my attention. And a mailer, basically, it's from the time you pull it out of the mailbox to while you're walking up the driveway, walking through your garage, and getting to the back door to throw it away.
Yeah.
That's the amount of time you've got to grab their attention.
That's what I've always told folks, Jeff. People do 2 things with their mail. They either walk to the trash can and open it over the trash can, decide what they're going to keep or not right there, or they set it immediately down on the kitchen counter. It sits there till the weekend, and they go to the trash can and sort it over the weekend. So you got to get their attention before it ends up in the trash can, and you're seeing that even more now. I do a lot of digital advertising, and the most effective things we see are the 15 and the 6-second videos, because that's what people have the attention span for. So you've got to get that message out there in snippets and get it out there in taglines in front of people.
I wish my attention span was that long.
Andy, but you're exactly right. I watch a lot of YouTube videos, particularly late at night before I go to bed, and now you're seeing these 15-second snippets come up on YouTube, advertising on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference is, on the that stuff's called pre-roll video, the ads you see, the videos you see online like that. I mean, the difference between the completion rates you see on a 15-second versus a 30 is it can be as high as 20 or 25% higher. People are going to watch that 15. They're not going to give you 30 seconds. They're going to move on to something else. Even if they really wanted to watch what's coming up after it, they're not going to stick with it.
Here's a term we hear about in politics all the time, and it's more at a national level, but curious whether it exists at the municipal levels. Is there dark money in these elections?
Not typically. I mean, you hear threats of that, and it happens occasionally, particularly around one issue. but you don't see it near as much. You're starting to see it some on the school board side, and in DA's races, you see it a lot.
I want to thank both of you for being on Good Morning LKN this morning. Jeff, thank you for what you do as our public policy chair of the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce. Andy, sharing some of the voter trends throughout Iredell County and Mecklenburg County. I want to remind everybody we have a show, Town Talk, every Wednesday, 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Next week, we'll be focusing on our Leadership Lake Norman program. You've been listening to WSIC Good Morning LKN. Thank you for joining us this morning.
The new 105.9, 100.7 WS.